All right, so I want to change gears a little bit, but really it's actually related to everything we've been talking about. Is I want to talk a little bit about social media and social media security. So, social media has sort of gone from a toy that seems like a marketing toy, if you will, to now a sort of a critical business function, right? Engaging with customers and all these things. And recently in the news, we've seen tons of pretty high-profile organizations have their social media accounts compromised and creating these sort of brand headaches. And everyone's rushed to get in social media and sort of maybe rushed and not really thought about it. Do you have any thoughts or recommendations to businesses of like how to keep social media secure? What are you seeing in that space, Rob?
Well, first of all, I think that you have to embrace social media. Just by a quick show of hands, how many folks in the room have at least one social media account? How about 2 social media accounts? How about 5 social media accounts? Anybody? There you go.
Where's John? Probably.
Yeah. I think you have to look at social media as a highly dynamic and distributed channel for promoting a number of messages. It's a great place to be. It gives you tremendous reach to a group of folks that you might not otherwise be able to reach because they don't communicate in that same place that you otherwise communicate. Right? We all use corporate email at some level, but that doesn't necessarily allow you to get out to the folks in this room. However, if I hit hashtag net diligence, those of you who are following the hashtag might get to know me a little bit better. So I say embrace it. But with that, I think there's a couple of caveats, and it's be vigilant, it's supervise it, and you've got to recognize that there are a whole host of areas that you have to really be concerned about. If you consider just some basic background, Twitter's got 200 million users plus and 200 million daily tweets. So what that means is communication gets out there much more quickly than it ever did. I mean, we're in an information overload. But to the point about threats and hacks and brand infringement, we see it every day. I'll share a couple of stories along the way. But the first is, there's a whole freedom of speech. But for me to go out there and say I just went to a great restaurant last night, but I saw something on the floor. The minute I see that something on the floor, I might post a tweet about that restaurant, and it may be very real and it may be very damaging. So there's a whole area that you really do have to consider. But take some other background facts. Facebook. 1 billion active users, 1.5 billion daily posts. The predominant population in that environment still keeps a highly public profile. So for me to search and find content, really easy to do. There's very few people who take that privacy consideration under advisement and tie down a lot of what people can see publicly. LinkedIn has 175 million users. I think it's one of the better social networking channels. It gives you the opportunity to access groups, but I think there are still inherent risks. I'll talk a little bit about the Marmont case in which an individual who had a LinkedIn account as a business owner left the business, had previously passed along her credentials, and all of a sudden the new company is basically saying, don't talk to this person, these are all of our clients. So you've got to ask yourself questions about any one of these social channels. So who owns the content? Who owns the friend? Who owns your professional connection? We're starting to see some real interesting content out of Instagram, Pinterest, YouTube, and Google+. We work with a number of high-end fashion retailers, and I can tell you that if you go to eBay, or if you go to Pinterest and you type in fake Chanel, fake Tiffany, you're going to find a ton of counterfeited content. And so we really recommend this whole concept of being vigilant. Threats, there's a ton of basic threats, right? They happen every day. Hundreds of millions of users are using the content. Last year, 6.5 million passwords were stolen on LinkedIn. Probably not a surprise, pardon me. Accounts get compromised because people aren't taking very basic minimum levels of precaution. Changing passwords. Not using the same password for all of your social accounts. I I'd be really worried that if I invited Vinny over to my office, he might see a couple pieces of paper hanging around that have symbols and signals. But that's for my recognition, and there are snippets of what my password would be. But a smart guy like Vinny's going to pick that up, and he's going to try and reverse engineer me. So,
that's why we're on the panel at 11:45. They were afraid we were going to go through everybody's luggage in the back of the room while the last panel went, so they put us on instead.
Well, I thought we RFID tagged them on. We walked by with our mobile phones and got every bit of information.
I tell me that you haven't.
And I look at this a little bit differently from my compatriots on the panel. I mean, I'm a product guy and a lawyer, so I try and keep some eye on what we're seeing in the marketplace. So, when you look at concepts like malware, which the folks up here have talked about, it's really easy to get into social. All right, we see it every day. Somebody compromises President Obama's Twitter account or pretends he's President Obama, and anybody who follows that hashtag immediately opens up that tweet. Oh, it must be something interesting. And there's a bit.ly, right? Everybody knows what a shortened URL is that many people drop into Twitter to keep content and context together, right? If I say, oh my God, bit.ly, you don't know what I'm referencing. But when you open that bit.ly, you know exactly what I'm referencing. So thinking about it from that perspective, the minute you open that link, there may very well be malware in that link. So there are a number of threats that you really have to be concerned about on a day-to-day basis. You have to have ongoing coaching and dialogue with your teams about what to do and what not to do with respect to opening email, certainly opening social channels. Worms get in, and once a worm is in, they're going to find your IDs and passwords. So, I think these are tremendously basic threats that you do have to be concerned about. But I really want to talk a little bit more about some of the areas that we're starting to see a lot of compliance and regulatory obligations. Just by show of hands, how many lawyers in the room? All right. How many of the lawyers in the room, just by show of hands, have posted a tweet or a post on Facebook or an article on LinkedIn with information about you, perhaps a success story, and a logo from your firm or your organization? Nobody. Okay, so you're doing it personally. We hear a lot of folks that are starting to promote wins through the corporate Twitter channel at a law firm. In the legal realm, there's a compliance obligation under most states for record keeping and supervision of advertisements. So an advertisement is nothing more than a communication with a brand at its most basic level. And I look around the room. How many of the folks that are possibly tweeting on behalf of your organization actually have a retention and supervision policy around social media? Wow. So I know there are more brands in this room that are tweeting on the corporate behalf. There's a nice opportunity to talk to some security experts up here. But you look at a recent situation in the FINRA space, another highly regulated industry, right? Securities. The SEC and FINRA both have tremendous record-keeping obligations, and now we're starting to see insurance companies with compliance obligations for all of their communications. A lot of the larger organizations have super strong governance and records management practices, but they've let it slide on the digital side. I think to Vinny's point about the cloud and the mobile is a new frontier. Social is a brand new frontier where the records management and the regulation is slowly starting to creep up, and folks are starting to scamper to figure out what they're going to do. Last week, we were watching the fine levied by FINRA on LPL, $7.5 million for not retaining nor supervising hundreds of millions, I think millions at least, of emails. Well, think about it. We know that email is fairly easy, and it was broken there through a change of ownership or vendor. But consider social media. So many of the financial institutions are struggling with whether or not they're going to let their folks use social. I mean, it's inevitable. They're going to have to. But if you consider the impact of a loss like $7.5 million from your revenue forecast on LPL for an email violation, think about what that could extend to with this highly distributed nature of social. It's a growing area. So I think you have to be concerned about risks associated with non-compliance. And I always encourage folks, look at your obligations. The FTC, right, has a regulation over record keeping and labeling of bridal gowns. Right? It extends well beyond what you would consider to be highly regulated industries. I think you have to look at the legal risks. So consider where we are today in the world of social. So many people are promoting things out over social. What's coming back today? A lot of evidence. So we talk about places where we're starting to see evidence mount. I look at 5 key practice areas, probably 6. Trademark abuse, counterfeiting is rampant, brand dilution is rampant. I think you have to consider that as a top area. The problem is we've really learned a lot of the hackers and the counterfeiters are coming from China. I've seen a client of mine does about 400 takedown requests a week on behalf of one particular high-end fashion retail client because that mark is being used on counterfeit websites. It's being used through Twitter or Instagram with pictures to get to e-commerce sites to buy knockoff goods. And the result isn't a monetary result. What they're getting is 400 new URLs that they claim ownership to and they get to seize in an ex parte situation. But that's one key area. Employment. Again, another whole area where we're starting to see a tremendous increase in the use of social media as evidence. You can go out and look at a couple of the cases in the news recently. I think one of the biggest was an FMLA claim. Complainant is actually hanging out in Mexico body surfing, right, after an injury. I mean, these are areas that I think everybody has to consider longer term. Personal injury ties back to that as well. I think we're going to start to see a lot more in family law and divorce where Facebook posts and tweets and MySpace pages are used. And then there's the entire criminal landscape in legal where you've got to look at the cases that are coming down the pipe today where the risks are tremendous. If you go and do something and post it on Twitter that is a violation of some law, that crime is likely to show up on Twitter somewhere. We're starting to see a tremendous amount of what we would call circumstantial evidence used to bring that case and bring that offender to justice. You look at Tienda and Griffin as 2 interesting cases where social media was used. And I think it brings up a whole new area where you're talking about concepts like admissibility and authentication as you go out there and try and grab the evidence. So some really interesting nuances and things that people just have to start to think about. And big data is going to be another one.